so they did that. They said, what's the anatomically correct name for body parts? They went over it and they were like, in your mind, who is safe and who's unsafe based on like what we just talked to you about? Well, he said, you, mommy, daddy, and neighbor. And they ended up finding out that the neighbor was, while he was babysitting, he was performing oral sex on the little boy.
Child sexual abuse, a horrendous subject for sure. But Nicole Escobar, executive director for Trees of Hope, joins the podcast to discuss why it needs to be a conversation, especially if you're a parent. She also shares her own personal experience of being sexually abused as a child and what her techniques are while raising children of her own. So, let's do it.
Too many days in the darkness without a glimpse of the light. Running tired and broken and scared, but I swear I'll never give up the fight. I see you broken and beat, head pulled down over your eyes. Every part of you wants to surrender, but darling, you were meant to survive. With every
So where did you get into this type of work?
So, well, it's first, let me tell you who Trees of Hope is, which will bring me to my story. So
it sounds like a long story and I'm here for it.
Yeah, it is. It is. So Trees of Hope is a nonprofit that has been around for about 17 years. And we have the mission of protecting the future and healing the past from sexual abuse. And so we do that with a twofold mission. And the prevention side of what we do, we basically do prevention outreach, educational resources, and workshops for parents, teachers, educators, volunteers, anyone who basically works with children. And on the healing side of what we do, we offer healing studies, either online, in person, or individual studies. And we offer those for women, men, and teen girls and teen boys. And so I bring all of that up is because Trees of Hope has been this nonprofit that has been around, right? And in the community in which I am in, which is a faith-based community, you end up hearing about these ministries or these organizations, and you're like, oh gosh, I never want to call them. I never want to deal with that organization, especially when you have a history of sexual abuse and you haven't dealt with it. And that's really where my story comes into play is I was about 30 years old. I'm 40 now, but I was about 30 years old and I had not yet dealt with what I had been through. And that was when I was 6 years old, I was sexually abused by my neighbor. And so this was somebody that I knew. It's somebody that it wasn't a stranger is my point. And a lot of times what we hear is, oh, we have to teach our kids the stranger danger. And yes, that's very important. 7% of sexual abuse cases are strangers, but 93% of sexual abuse happens through someone a child knows, loves, and trusts. And so that's really where we are leaning in, and we want to partner with parents to educate them like, hey, you live in a safe neighborhood. So what? You are still vulnerable. You live in a really bad neighborhood. So what? You're just as vulnerable as you are as the rich person that lives in Jeffrey Epstein's neighborhood. The point is that as a parent, you have to examine your life and your vulnerabilities and say, how is my kid potentially vulnerable? We hear all the time kids get sexually abused at church, at camps, at sleepovers, at all of these things where parents are like, oh, my kids are safe in this atmosphere, but they end up not being. And so me and my family, we had a great relationship. We talked all the time, but our vulnerability was that they didn't talk to me about my body. They didn't talk to me about how my body functioned. They didn't go over the anatomically correct names for body parts. So yeah, I knew my elbow, but did I know that my vagina was my vagina or that my breasts were my breasts and that there's a difference between boys and girls? Sure, I knew it conceptually, but did I understand it, right? And did I understand at the time that, hey, when somebody tries to touch you in those places, you need to run away, right? And so my parents thought, Yeah, and my parents thought she's strong. She's, she's a tiger, so she'll run away. And they don't realize that a lot of times with sexual abuse, there's so much more that's involved in it. There's emotional, there's psychological boundaries that are already being crossed. And yes, it's so young, so it's hard to think like, how is a 13-year-old thinking about crossing psychological boundaries? Well, they know how to do it. And so for me and my story, like I said, he was my neighbor. I knew him and he molested me. And I did not leave there and run home and tell my parents. But what I did was that day I felt a new feeling of shame that I never felt before. And so I did not run home, tell my parents. But what I did was I now had a secret. And this secret, I coped keeping it through as I was growing up. I got involved in drugs, partying. I was, popular. So I ended up doing a lot of things where I was getting involved in different crowds that I shouldn't have gotten involved in, things like that. And it wasn't until I was like 22 years old where somebody introduced me to a local church and I ended up giving my life to Christ. But that doesn't mean my problems went away, right? So that's just not how it goes. But what did happen is that I turned my partying and all that other stuff into another thing, which was perfectionism. And so I now was the overachiever and I excelled at everything that I did. And so, you can be on the outside, look like you have it all together. You could be that person where everyone's like, man, she's got it, right? I had a scholarship. I was the leader at my school. I was on the tennis team. I had all these things that on the outside looked really great. And I was a Christian and I was a leader I worked part-time and went to school and I was excelled well at my job, but my heart was a mess. And I needed healing for what had happened to me, because it was not only a wound that happened to me as a person physically, but it was also a wound that affected my heart and my soul. And so that's where Trees of Hope comes in. Is I ended up running into the founder of Trees of Hope at my business. I actually couldn't avoid her one day. And I always, tried to avoid her as much as possible. And this day I couldn't. And she started talking to me, and she's the type of person that she'll like see you, start talking to you, and she'll ask you straight up, have you been sexually abused? So I was scared.
Will she really?
Yeah, she's like that. When people know her, they're like, whoa, like she asked me that too. And I'm like, but thank God she did, because it was that day she caught me and I said yes. And she said, well, I have a healing study for you that you need to go through. And I was like, okay, great. And then I was like, please don't ever contact me again, please. She's like, let me get your number. She ended up texting me, calling me, and had a group going. So that was back in 2014. And I ended up walking through the healing study. It's 12 weeks in length, deals with all kinds of different things, shame, guilt, the dysfunction of our family. How do we lead to these things, right? It's never our fault, but there is contributing factors that can play into it for why we don't speak up sooner. And so she prayed, I prayed, and then later asked me to leave my cushy job at the time to come and run Trees of Hope. And I did not want to do it, but I really believe that, when you're called to do something, you got to step out in faith to do it. And so I did that. And it's been the greatest blessing of my life. I get to now use my story to comfort others and to bring hope to others. And that's really, every project, everything that we put our heart and soul into has that mindset involved in it, which is we want to reach anyone, anywhere. For whatever reason you're not ready to come forward, we hope we meet you and we can encourage you to step up and do it and take charge of this chapter of your life. Take back control, really.
Yeah, Yoko Ono actually said it perfectly too. Healing yourself is connected with healing others. Which really is John Lennon's wife at the time when he got shot. Because it has completely worked on you. I can tell just from speaking with you how bubbly you are, how refreshed to life you are, what that change can be, because from what you have gone through, there's about 24 years then, right? From
Yeah.
6 years old to 30, carrying something of that weight. Now, do you remember,
Mhm.
do you remember, like, as a teen and into your 20s, like, the reason why you felt a lot of those things, like shame and guilt? Do you remember the reason, or do you just remember carrying the emotions up until you really went through, like, the healing study to where you really exposed exactly why it was?
Yeah, I think, I think every survivor will probably relate to this, whereas like you think it's one thing and then you deal with it and then you realize it's something, it could be some other reason for why you didn't speak up. For me at the time, it was that I believed wholeheartedly that it was my fault. I believed I did something like, hey, I'm the one who went into the bush or went into the backyard with this kid. So therefore it is my fault, right? But that's a false belief. And so it's a lie. And I believe that lie. So as strong as I was, as brave as I was, and as I had walls around my heart, when I was able to take an honest look inward and say, really? Did other little boys do that to you? Did other 13-year-old kids violate you in that way? No, they didn't. So it was him who did that, not you. So I was able to, and then also I was able to put in truth statements into those things, which is the truth is some of those things that I said, but also even if I was butt naked, walking down the street, it's never someone's right to violate me, period. It doesn't matter. There was, I can't remember the girl's name, but she was sexually abused by a kid at her school. She was raped at a party by a kid at her school. And this is a very famous story. And I can't believe I can't remember her name right now, but she wrote a memoir. And basically this kid was raping her behind a dumpster.
Oh,
And
yeah, it was Brock Turner,
yes, thank
the
you.
swimmer.
Yes. So she said about him, she said about the situation, my sexual abuse, because he said she was drunk, and the reality is yeah, drunk should get me a hangover, not rape, right?
Yeah.
So the consequences of being drunk is a hangover. They're what I'm allowing to happen to my own body. Like, you have no right to tell me what happens to my body.
Yeah.
So yeah, those were some things. And then as I walked through healing, I realized that, although I thought I had this very strong relationship with my parents, there was so much shame in my own family dynamic of talking about, again, like our bodies. I remember getting my first period and my mom at the dinner table, like, brought out ketchup and like, was like, Nicole got her period, and was like making the joke.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, no wonder y'all, like, I didn't feel super confident to come talk about this,
Yeah.
And so, they felt a lot of regret after when I did expose it and I told them about it. But I also don't want them to think it's their fault. Because again, the blame is on the perpetrator, not my family. My family is to blame for being naive, but is that really their fault?
Yeah. The ketchup thing, I would think would come from like a dad. I could see a dad doing something more so that, you know what I'm saying? Where like they don't know how to handle it. They're just trying to make a dad joke out of it when they are so above their head.
Totally.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do have to say, like, my dad is the coolest. I'm a daddy's girl through and through. So my dad, for some reason, just had like a sensitive, he was sensitive towards me on those things. Yeah.
When do you, speaking of parents, when do you think it is, like, is there a too early time to have those conversations with what your body parts are? Because I got to think, like, if I'm a parent and I have a 6-year-old boy or girl, I got to think, all right, well, it's probably way too early to have that conversation. But at the same time, like, to avoid situations like you were in, to where you don't know what's right or wrong. And if somebody touches you here, that is wrong. And you need to tell me immediately. I mean, sure. Is there a time that's too soon then to even have that conversation?
So in my perspective, and this is what we teach at Trees of Hope, is no time is too soon. it's just age appropriate, right? So for instance, I have
Yeah.
two boys. One is 6 months, so obviously I'm not going to talk to him, but the other one is 18 months. So I'm now, when I'm washing him, I mean, this may sound silly, but like I'll like wash underneath his arms, and I'm like, I'm washing your elbow, I'm washing your shoulders, I'm washing your penis, and I make it like a very natural flow. I try to use these conversations in everything that he does. So when I pull up his pants, his underwear, I just say, reminder, no one sees anything that's in your no-no spot, you know, your no-no square. And for a boy, a no-no square is like your penis and your anus, anything that falls underneath your bathing suit. For a young girl, that would be her, you know, breasts and her vagina. But the truth is that the more shame the parent has in talking about these things, the more shame the child's going to have. So being open, being honest, recognizing there is a difference between male and femaleness, right? And so being comfortable talking about those things. Yes, like if I don't do this because I am fostering, so I do try to be very cautious about how I dress. As in, with my son, I would take him into the shower with me, but with my foster child, I wouldn't. But I have worn my sports bra in the shower, and he's grabbed me in those areas like, what is that? And I'm like, those are mommy's breasts. But I don't sit there and be like, oh my God, don't touch that. Don't look at that. Because that then all of a sudden he's like, oh, there's a sense of shame attached to this area of her body. Now, we also don't want to encourage them going out and touching other kids in those areas.
Yeah.
Right. So you also want to talk about, hey, those are private. And when we say private, that means that they're not to be exposed. It is a body part like your elbow, but it's not to be exposed as freely as your elbow.
No, that's a good point, to try to normalize it, but to a appropriate level. You know, you're not going to go and start talking about like sex and so way too early, but obviously just for them to be able to have those defense mechanisms if they are at like a summer camp or whatnot, which is, it is very scary to know that, like, as a parent, you do have to have a arm's distance length with everybody that comes into your child's life, which is so disappointing to really like learn. I guess it's like coming out of ignorance, I guess, where it's like learning what is a true predator, because a true predator is not someone who is dressed like, you know, with the scary horns and so forth, but that true predator is sometimes dressed as your best friend, disguised as nice and caring and supportive, and then doing possibly horrendous things. So it is so wild to think about that. Like, that is something that right now, I mean, you really have to put in more effort in that regard over the stranger danger scenario, because it's so much more likely to happen from someone you know. And it's a pretty wild concept that even like the country and where we live in 2020, in the year 2023, that is something that we have to do, is an armed distance. Because it's saddening to me, because it's another dig at the destruction of community, a sense of community.
Oh yeah. And the truth is that this has always been here, but I think, you know, like there's a nostalgic view. Like when I think of my childhood, I just got on my bike, rode down the street to a market, and I picked up pizza. I mean, I was smoking cigarettes at like 12 years old, things I shouldn't have been doing. But at the same time, there was a freedom, right? But my parents, they didn't think like that. They didn't think like, oh, they thought as long as she's back by 5, you know, we're good here. Meanwhile, there was people that that got involved in our lives, like this neighbor who should never have been involved in our lives. And if my parents were a little bit more involved in my life, they would have seen like, hey, this is a red flag. And so just, you know, to sort of piggyback on what you said, you mentioned some of the things that like parents have to look out for. The truth is that the predators who are coming after kids, they're going to be people who probably are going to have jobs around children. So yeah, it's like if somebody's starting to offer babysitting for free. Why? No one wants to babysit. I have kids, but I'm never going to offer for free or hang out. Sure, you want to drop your kid off for like an hour, no problem, but not hours. I don't. And buying gifts, sending toys, spending lots of time around you and your family, that should be like a red flag. Like, hey, something is wrong here. And the truth is that when we talk with people who've been sexually abused and their parents and their family in total, you always ask like, hey, were there any red flags? And at first they'll probably say, oh no, he like, just like you said, he was so sweet, he was so nice, he was so helpful. He would always offer to take my kid to his sports games. He would buy him a helmet or buy him. Okay, well, those are red flags. Right? Those are red flags. Unfortunately, what was meant for good has been distorted, and so that's the unfortunate thing. So yeah, we always encourage parents, check your circle, check your kid's circle. So know the kid too, because kids can sexually abuse other kids.
Yeah.
And and trust your gut, and also don't bypass things as that's just kids being kids. Because that's where things can be, yes, kids can be just kids. But when you start seeing kids maybe like masturbating in public, that's not kids just being kids. That's a red flag. Kids laying on top of other kids naked with an erection, that's not kids. That's not exploratory, right? Something is wrong there. So yeah, you want to look into those things. A kid pulling down his pants, showing his penis, not a big deal. But if he's erect, there's something, we want to look into that. And so, yeah, there's when we do prevention workshops, we kind of go through and talk with people. We ask them if you're, courageous enough to stand and talk about anything that's happened in your life. And we usually get people stand and they say, this happened to my kid, blah, blah, and they'll always share. Okay, those were some of the red flags. Like those were some of the things that were happening. And we did swept it under the rug as exploratory or not or kids just being kids, and you just can't anymore.
Where do you think some of this comes from? Do you think it's you always have the discussion nature versus nurture on things, and I go just completely back and forth, whatever topic it is on nature versus nurture, because you can make a direct argument for both and be like, that is a very good argument, but then there are direct counters to that. And I mean, like for example, like Carl Jung once said, the healthy man does not torture others. Generally, it is the tortured who turn into the torturers, and I'm like, that does make sense. And in a lot of cases, that is the case where deep down, like a lot of these people who turn into the child molesters were molested once as a child. But then, I look at Nicole and I'm like, that's obviously not the case. That is a direct, conflict of that argument, which is somebody who has turned that completely the opposite. Almost like this one episode of Criminal Minds where the show Criminal Minds?
Yeah.
Where the FBI agent was arresting a serial killer who was I think raping a lot of people and killing them. And his own brother was a murderer himself. And at the end of the episode, I'll never forget it. It was really good writing on the producers, because he had said, some people who had experienced trauma as a child, some grow up to kill them, some grow up to kill, and then some grow up to catch those who kill, meaning himself. And I thought it was a really great insight, because it kind of counters that the narrative of the nature or nurture, really. And there's a lot of different research out there, but I'm wondering, have you ever had, in your own experience and through healing, through your healing studies, have you ever come across somebody who has acknowledged that they've gone through experiences as a child and either have thoughts or have or I'm not sure if you guys ever have worked in workshops with people who have admitted to pedophilia interests at all, and where that possibly has come from.
Yeah. I mean, no, not openly, but you never know. But I have watched a documentary on a guy who was a pedophile who basically lived a life of, he was a convicted person who acted on it prior to this documentary, and then lived a life of not acting on it. But it's very much like, I mean, and you can totally cut this out. So my thoughts are always, I go back to, it's a soul issue. It's a heart issue. And when we fuel our heart with good things, right? Like, the Bible talks about how the tongue has the power to give life or to give death. And so, if I'm a parent and I'm pouring into my children, investing into their lives by giving them fuel, like, of positive words, always encouraging them, trying to be there, trying to be supportive. When they talk to me about stuff, I have an understanding spirit. I talk through it with them. I try not to shame them, make them feel like bad for who they are and the things
how
that
they feel.
do. Yeah. But just try to be an uplifter and really a life giver, right? I do think that child is going to really be on a good path to never act out. Now, you have a kid who comes from a home where they're being physically, mentally abused, and the words that they're getting are words of death, of like, you're a loser, you're a piece of crap. Well, yeah, who I think I am is who I'm going to be, right? So yeah, I'm going to probably act out on those things. And yes, I do think that pedophilia is a mental disorder. I really do. And I think that they're believing a lie that this is their desire. And I know that desires can be tamed. I have a desire to be
absolutely, yeah,
$1 million lifestyle, but I also have a budget that says, no, you don't, like, and check yourself. So I'm able to tame that through discipline, through actions, through repetitive things, day in and day out, where I stop that. So I think it's very similar. So if I fuel my desires, my pedophilia desires, with pornography that shows children as just being, acts of my desires being acted out on, yeah, I'm probably going to be acting that out and being like a really bad person to society. But if I'm somebody who I recognize I have this desire and I can learn to tame it, and I can, and I really do believe, like, you need help with that. So it's getting around the right community. It's going to community groups. I mean, I think that's why AA is so important, is being a part of a group of people that say, we feel the same way you do, but we're going to root you on. We're rooting on, you got this, we got this, you got this. So we're in this together. Right. And so I would say that, those are some of the things. Also, watching your atmosphere, watching what you look at, watching what you listen to.
Very important.
And keeping yourself away. Like, I wouldn't, if I've ever had a desire for a child, I probably wouldn't go work at an elementary school.
Yeah.
I'm going to go work at, maybe go work in a machinery, like work somewhere totally away from that.
When it's the opposite, a lot of times that's where they desire to go. It's not even like a circumstance that gets them there. It's like, no, I want to be a gym teacher or so.
Right. Yeah, because basically what they've told themselves is, who cares? You can't overcome this, so why not lean deeper into it?
Yeah, which is such a fatal mistake. Fatal. It's again, it's me going to the mall every day and walking around clothes and being like, acting like as if, and then I'm buying them and I'm fueling my desire for those clothes. It's stupid. Get out of that atmosphere. Yeah, and I'm sure the scary thing is that I'm sure there's a lot of people that are like that are like trying to avoid their self-indulgences of that.
Sure.
And take into account, though, the amount of that's not including the amount of people that are acting on it, though, because now you have a humongous portion of people that are susceptible, very susceptible to acting out on it, and they're not even included in the people that are acting out of it. Because I think that there's the people that are not acting out on it in any way. Mm-hmm. Then you have the people that are acting out on it in a virtual way, kind of like a crawl, walk, run, where they're on the computer doing it. And then you have the people that have probably graduated from the computer to actually doing it in real life. And we only know about a third of that amount of people, which, you know, there's 750,000 sex offenders in the United States, and we only know a third of the people acting out, which by the time they hit that level, that's, I say a third of it, but that's probably, if there's 3 categories with the least amount of people, it's probably that one, because they've reached the highest level of it, which most people probably don't do. So now you have the two lower tiers that are including way more people in the third tier, and we don't know about those people at all, which is insane that this is not like a bigger thing than it is, because it's a big thing, but like this should be talked about like almost on a daily life schedule, which kind of it reminds me of like it being so bad that it's become normalized, like the shootings in Chicago, where every single weekend there's 45 people that got shot in Chicago, and I'm like, how is this not a thing? But like, it's so bad that it's become normalized, and it's just like how do we unnormalize it, or at least just make it like a red alarm going off? Because I had the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children on the podcast a couple episodes ago, and they you know, that morning before the podcast, I just looked up the amount of cases that day of exploiting children sexually, whether that was actual sexual abuse, whether that was somebody getting arrested for pornography, or, you know, a huge thing was installing the cameras. That was that's a huge thing right now, which is installing hidden cameras. And that morning alone, throughout the United States, on the first Google page alone, there was 8 separate cases of someone being arrested across the country related to some sort of child exploitation sexually. And that was me staying on the first page of Google that morning alone. So when I typed it in, it was really just all the local news covering it from Missouri, Missouri, Florida, Carolinas, all over the country. And the prevalence of it is it's really hard to understand the prevalence of it. And so why it was when we were talking earlier about really like you really have to have a lack of trust with people first, and put up that arm's length with people. And especially, I like that you had said, really, you know, you should be factoring in the time that somebody wants to spend with your child, whether it's just like, all right, we're driving to practice, I'm picking your child up to go to practice. That makes sense. That's for functionality purposes. But that stop for ice cream and the walk through the park afterwards is really a huge red flag on that, because it reminded me of I was watching a documentary on the ancient Romans, and Marcus Aurelius is like a really I'm not sure if you ever saw the movie The Gladiator, but in the beginning where he strolls in, Crow strolls in, and that's Marcus Aurelius there. And I watched a documentary on Rome, and Marcus Aurelius had said to Commodus, his son, he was just left the Senate chambers, and all the senators were filing out. And he turns to his son and says, "Don't trust any of them," you know. And it really it reminds me of this, because not that like you want to have that relationship with like the coaches and people that are around your child all the time, but having that mindset of like, don't trust is earned gradually, definitely not over time. And like that person earns their way in. It's very hard. It's got to be very hard being a parent today, with the amount of little time that you have with your child, to be able to facilitate this. But really, it's wild.
Yeah, it's really, it's being very intentional in every area of their life. So, you know, if you're somebody that has to bring your kids to daycare, it's not just, oh, hey, local daycare, cool. It's, hey, do your due diligence, do your Google reviews, call. You want to go walk the property. You want to meet the people who are going to be around. You want to ask their policies and procedures of like, hey, how many adults are allowed to be back in here? How many adults are touching my kid, as in not physically touching, but like does the janitor just walk in? Does he clean when the kids are here? Like those kinds of things. Are parents allowed to just walk in the back? And, if you need a babysitter, vet those people, go on their social media, make sure their values align with yours. A lot of times you're going to find, if someone's partying and if they're politically doing different things that are not your political alignment, you want to, maybe not have them, because the reality is that you don't know what they're thinking when they're around your kid. And you want to make sure that you're, just being intentional, doing your due diligence in every area. Don't just trust churches because they're church. Right. I have so many churches, so many kids who come to us who have been sexually abused at the church. It's unfortunate, but it's the way that it goes. So yeah, it sucks that you have to be extra now thing. And the reason why we don't talk about it all the time is because even if we did talk about it all the time, it would be too much for people to deal with. Because the truth is if statistics are true, that means 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 6 boys have been sexually abused by the age of 18. It's a lot of people in America. So in America alone. So can you imagine if we every day we talked about it? It's like, okay, I've been through this thing. I don't want to deal with it. I'm talking about it, and it's not going to get people to get going, unfortunately. So that is the rub that we have at Trees of Hope. Is like, how do we encourage people? How do we say, hey, deal with it? But you're dealing with it more so that you can prevent it from happening in your own family. And yeah, it's this, but people like you who are willing to have these conversations are really the champions and really the partners that we need in life, like any ministry or any organization that's doing this hard work.
Yeah. I mean, it's invaluable, because I mean it could just spark even though some of the stories we were talking about, like somebody, let's go get ice cream or something like that, I could spark, oh wait, yeah, that person in my life did that with my kids. It's just a little weird. You're probably right. If you have that thought of that seemed off, like that might be
right.
That really might be something there that you might want to look into, or just do a little deeper dive on, or especially like if like you were talking earlier with people with kids molesting each other, like if there's parents are never home, that usually leaves an open case of just breeding for things that could happen, especially if there's one, because all it takes is one kid there. Because I was a kid. All it takes is one kid to be in a room with 10 other really well-behaved kids. And all it takes is that one kid. And
right.
within like 4 hours, 5 hours, if there's no supervision, I mean, there could be some wild shit going on.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And that's why I'm saying, like, if you were in a room with 10 kids, I bet you 3 of them had been sexually abused, or at least 4 of them had been sexually abused. So how do I know what those kids are doing? And like some of the things my brother would tell me that he used to, or that kids would do to him, is, like I said, laying on top of him naked. And I'm like, dude, you were sexually abused. Like, hello. And he was like, no, and always making an excuse. And it's like, well, until you're at a place where you can honestly say, like, hey, that violated me. That set me up and opened up a sexual world that I wasn't ready for yet. Right. So it may not have been sexual abuse, but it was not life-giving. It was taking. Right. And it was setting him up for failure, so, and I hear those stories all the time, and I'm like, okay, maybe not full on sexual abuse, but it wasn't beneficial to you.
Yeah, because people immediately think of like the full on rape scenes, like from who is that? Sandusky in Penn State, which is not, which actually, by the way, I almost went to actually
really?
in that Penn State football camp. I was in 7th and 8th grade at the time, and my friend had gone there for the last like 3 years of Penn State football camp. And we are just about to get into high school, so we were going to go to the football camp because we all played football. But I told my parents like I wasn't going to play football in high school until I was a senior. I wanted to concentrate on like other sports. So my parents didn't see like any like, all right, if you're not going to play in high school till later on, then there's no point in you going to the football camp. So I actually I didn't go just because of that point, but I really, really did want to go. And I don't, obviously I don't think anything happened to my friends specifically, but that was like Sandusky prime time was
Sure.
around them, which is wild how close
Right.
you are to a lot of these things, and how many people have been affected. You probably know way more people that were affected
Oh yeah.
than you actually think right now.
Sure. And the other thing that to add to that is, maybe looking at your own life. I mean, I don't know what made you not vulnerable, like, right? And so look at that. Trust me, it wasn't that, I don't know your family background or anything like that, but, a lot of these kids came from, they were rich. They were kids that parents just kind of sent them off, wasn't invested. They had family units that just, maybe didn't have open lines of communication. And he knew that. It's just, there's vulnerabilities in all families. It's just really being honest with yourself and saying, what's mine? What's my vulnerability? And so I definitely don't stand here and say, like, I have none. I have plenty. My husband works full time. I'm the primary caretaker of my kids. I'm the one who takes them in and out, goes to various like parks and playgrounds and things like that. So my vulnerability is I've got 2 kids under 2 years old, one in a stroller, one's running around, and I'm trying to, keep attention on both. That's the stranger danger part. My vulnerability could be that I have a neighbor who's like, hey, I see that you're really busy.
Yeah.
I would love to help. Tell like your son, if he wants to come on over and hang out at my house, he can. A mom who's maybe uneducated would be like, let's go, get them on over there.
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
But no, that's not that. So that would be a vulnerability. So, it's really just being honest with ourselves and also when like these things happen or like a red flag comes up in school, in, church or whatever, youth camp, anything. And you go, whoa, that was weird. You don't just go, whoa, that's weird. Okay, fluff it off, or like, oh, maybe my kid's lying because they have a history of lying or whatever. You be that pit bull tiger parent and go deal with it right away, because you never know. I could tell you a story. The reason actually why our prevention program even started at Trees of Hope is because we did a prevention workshop. We had this information, just very general, like we were just like learning ourselves and teaching it. And a parent there, she goes home, talks to her husband. She says, I learned that we should be teaching our kids anatomically correct name for body parts and talking about who's safe and unsafe. So I want to talk to our son and make sure that he knows that we're the safe people and no one else is. So they did that. They said, what's the anatomically correct name for body parts? They went over it and they were like, in your mind, who is safe and who's unsafe based on like what we just talked to you about? Well, he said, you, mommy, daddy, and neighbor. And they ended up finding out that the neighbor was, while he was babysitting, he was performing oral sex on the little boy. So it's important that, you don't just, mom, obviously this was heartbreaking for her, but you don't just write it off as, oh, whatever.
How old was the boy?
He was like 6 or 7, like,
damn.
just a kid. Yeah. But old enough to, speak up. Like he wasn't like an infant, but he was. But again, when you've got somebody who you look up to, like your babysitter, that's been your neighbor for years, that your parents welcome into their home, you don't know what he's saying to him either. He could have been saying, don't tell your mom or dad or whatever.
Yeah.
Or every time, you do this, I'm going to tell your mom or dad that you're gay. Right. And these could be Christian parents. And now he's like, I'm never going to tell anybody. Right. So it's definitely gets harder, and they don't just use sexual abuse. It's not just physical. Like I said before, it's also a mental mind game that these people do on you, on the child a lot of times.
Oh, for sure. For sure. And I mean, in your podcast, which is not just a hashtag podcast, is what it's called, which is an awesome podcast. Everyone should go over right after this episode and go check it out because it's awesome. You put it in perfectly, which is describing sexual abuse as a devastating form of betrayal, which is really like the perfect way to put it, because you're, like you said, looking up to somebody and like you want to please them in the best way possible and not like show them any sign of weakness or like non-conformity, especially when you're a child. So like for you to like not do anything that they're going to ask you it would be devastating to you to see them be disappointed in you. So you're really just trying to form a stronger relationship, especially at that age of 6. I mean, geez, you're way too young to even realize that the dynamics of manipulation, and then of course the betrayal when, you know, obviously it eventually comes down the road, or you just know it, and won't tell anyone, which you've gone through both. But that was the perfect way to put it.
Yeah, and sorry, but you just totally reminded me of another reason why, because I heard this when I was younger and I giggled at it like so silly, which is we need to ask kids for consent to touch their bodies. And now I do. And do I ask my kid, can I touch your body? Can I change your diaper? No.
Yeah.
But when I'm bathing him and I'm like, mommy's going to touch your pee-pee or mommy's going to touch your penis, is that okay? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, okay. I'm not doing that. I have to still clean him. That's the reality. But what I'm doing is I'm setting him up to know your body is your own. And when somebody wants to touch you, they have to ask for consent. And what that looks like is sometimes my dad, you know, I'm Italian. We come from a kissing family. My dad called me ghoulie growing up, which is butt. He likes to smack butts, pinch butts, do all this stuff. And I told him, do not for my sons, please make sure you're asking them all the time. If they don't want to kiss you, you move on, right? Don't make a big deal about it. Oh, like, don't let him feel like he has to please you through giving you a kiss. And I struggle with this too, because my one son, he used to be like my little lover. And now his new thing is like, I'll be like, give mommy a kiss. And he's like, oh, and he like looks away. And truly my heart is broken. And I'm like, you little punk, you better give me a kiss. But I go, that's fine. You give me a kiss when you're ready, buddy. I'm here for you. And of course he always runs over and gives me a kiss. But what I'm basically setting him up for is you can say no to adults when they want something from you through your body.
Yeah, that culture setting you just put is tough. Really is, because people are used to like the hellos and goodbyes. I used to work predominantly in a Hispanic setting, and everybody kiss on the cheek, but like the thing is, like when somebody has feelings for another person, that kiss is so much more and so much further, and there's a little grab, or you know, or somebody, you know, like they just take advantage of it fully. Sure. They fully take advantage. So I was the only one to where like I would pull back and go, no, pound, like, you know, the fist on the fist, and I would laugh and giggle, so it's not like weird. But I like, there was a couple times, especially when I first started working there, you know, there'd be I remember specifically two women back to back were like, oh, hey, and you know, they lean in to show me their kiss, and I would pull back and go, no, pound, because like I don't want to. I've seen guys are the biggest, you know, I don't want to say perpetrators, but guys are the biggest ones that will take advantage of that situation. Sure. You know what I'm saying? Well, they'll lean in, give a huge hug and so forth. And I was like, I don't want to be one of those guys or be accused of being one of those guys. And B, like, I don't want somebody to do that to me and like get an extra grab or something like that.
Sure,
you know? Because now you're having to deal with that at work, and it's weird. So I know exactly what you were talking about, because that is a big thing today too, because people don't want to let go of that, and it really is a nice cultural traditional thing. But you know, obviously within everyone has that. I feel like everyone has those uncle stories of
my uncle, he used to force me to kiss him on the lips. I could not kiss him on the cheek, and I hated it. And it wasn't until I was like 35 that I told my dad. My dad was like, I didn't know that. Like, now he's like ready to kill the guy, and I'm like, it's all good, Dad. I said, but what that did was it was a part of a bigger thing, which was your body's not your own, right? So, you know, that's important that we as parents, you know, I know you're not a parent, but and then what you're doing is exactly right. It's just basically, you know, step back. I'm not going to give you a kiss. And my husband's Latin, and so I know his whole family's Latin, and they always want to, and I'm like, whoa, bro. Whoa,
you're looking like Floyd Mayweather over there, dipping and diving.
Yeah. Like, nope. Yeah. So I get it 100%.
Oh, I gotcha. This is all super great, Nicole. I appreciate you so much for coming on today and chatting with this humongous important issue. Hopefully we can chat again down the road with some great news and some more stories of you helping other people and learn more about your healing studies and how more people have gone through that and maybe have a similar perspective now from where they came from to where they are today, like you do.
Yeah, of course. Anything, anytime. I'm always, I say I'm always available, but, within the confinements of like my schedule. But absolutely, I would love to do that because I think, like you said, this is a topic that needs to be discussed. And we are a local help for people. And anyone who's listening, I'm the type, I really believe that things happen for a reason. So I'm not just on here because just you needed a spot filled. I'm on here because I really believe that fate brought us together and there's someone out there that needs the help that we offer, and please utilize us. This is the knock on your heart that you've been looking for.
Yeah. And you're talking directly to the people that need it too.
Yeah.
And where can they find you guys if they do want to reach out?
Sure. So treesofhope.org is our website. But like you mentioned, not just a hashtag podcast is our podcast. And you can find all of our resources there, all of our healing studies, our upcoming group studies. We have online studies. So if you're not ready for the group setting, which I totally get, that's why we created them. The online version is there to be at your pace, your time, wherever you are. If you're not in South Florida, cool. You can be in Africa and you can still watch them. We send everybody a box of hope, and that's filled with our own curriculum and a journal, affirmation cards, and just really something to help you get through to this successfully through the group. And it's awesome. So.
Okay. Well, thanks for all that, Nicole. I appreciate it, and helping parents and children everywhere. So obviously can't thank you enough.
Yeah. Back at you. Thank you.
And we will chat down the road, Nicole.
All
for
right.
sure.